So it's a pleasure to welcome Secretary Pritzker back to Chicago and back to the University of Chicago. Great supporter of this institution and this institute, so we're grateful for that. We know you as a really successful business person. You have a sterling reputation in that regard. Tell me what it's like to make the transition from business to government, and what did you, what surprised you, what appalled you, what surprised you on the high side? Tell me about that transition.
Well, first of all, David, let's start with the bottom line. It's really an honor and a pleasure to do this job, and to be asked by the president to come into a role where he asked me really to do three things. One was be a bridge to the business community, to be the chief commercial advocate on behalf of business, to be part of his economic team, and to make sure that the voice of business is heard as economic policy is being created, and in some respects, national security policy. And so what's familiar, or the way I've approached the job, is to come in and say the Department of Commerce had not had the, let's say, sustained leadership for, the previous at least 4 years. There'd been a lot of turnover. So to come in and really work with the leaders there to develop a strategy for the Department of Commerce was the way I approached the job. And that is very similar to the way I've approached my business life, which is you either buy or become a leader in a new business. What do? The first thing you do is try and figure out what's my strategy, and it's not my strategy, it's our strategy. So it's really working with the leadership team to figure out what are we trying to accomplish over the ensuing 3.5 years for the department, for the White House, for the president, for the American people, for the department itself, which has about 47,000 people. The second thing that is the people. What do we know? We all in this room know if we're going to lead an organization, the most important asset you have are your people. I don't care what business you're in. I don't care if you're in a business of bricks and mortar or you're in a business of bits and bytes. Your most important asset are your people. And I walked into an organization that had over 15 of my 22 Senate confirmed positions were either vacant or coming vacant, and 80% of the leadership of the Office of the Secretary was vacant. So it is a place that was kind of running itself, but wasn't running anywhere. It was just doing things, but there wasn't a focus, and there weren't the people to sort of knit it together. And over the over the first 12 months, we really focused on making sure to get the right people in place so that we could execute a strategy. So in that respect, and people is hard. It's hard to attract people into government, which is a shame. It's a real shame because, frankly, when it comes to the commercial world, those folks in business want more people in business in government so that there's a better understanding of, on both parts, right? That bridge that the president wanted. I want a greater bridge to the business community, which I have met with over 1,400 CEOs since I took this position a little over 17 months ago.
When you talk about building a bridge to business, it's not a secret that there is this sense of a chasm between the president and the business community. You hear a lot of that from the business community. What is the root of that in your view, and how? What are in the final 2 years here? What are the things that could help close that?
Well, first, I would say I think it's much improved. I mean, I would give the credit to a lot to our team, and the fact that we've been out there. We, as I said, we met with over 1,400 business leaders around the United States. We've fully a third of the Fortune 500 CEOs we meet with. They call, they pick up the phone when they have a problem now. They feel, we've set the organization. The number one thing I said to our team when I came in is, our number one stakeholder is the business community, and we are a service organization. And our job, it doesn't mean our only stakeholder is the business community. We have the Hill, we have the White House, we have think tanks, we have all kinds of, we have the labor is a very important constituency for us. But I think we've made a lot of progress with business leaders, both large businesses and smaller and medium-sized businesses, and I put them in two categories. The larger businesses are very well represented by associations, and those CEOs know how to find us. They have organizations, their job is to work with Washington, so they know how to find us. And we've become far more responsive. And if the answer is no, the answer is no, and we tell them no. If the answer is we're working on it and we'll work on it together, we try to bring everything to closure. In fact, there's sort of a joke around the office. We track everything. We track if you've contacted us and what you want and whether it's been closed out or not. We track how many thank you letters we owe and whether we've done them on time. We track who on the Hill is, because to me, it's like if we don't know.
Those weren't in place before.
Zero. We weren't tracking anything. And
the weather, you were tracking the weather.
the weather, we're good at the weather. We're good at the weather, despite what some in the Northeast would like to say.
The weird thing about the Commerce Department, because it has a pretty far-flung portfolio. You should describe.
So the Commerce Department is, just to give you the boundaries of what we do the weather, which is extremely important, obviously. We are also in NOAA, we're responsible for the coastlines, the health of our coastlines, which means we literally count the fish in the sea and we tell you how many you can catch. So you can imagine that there's a whole issue, for example, right now in the Northeast, cod. There's not enough cod in the sea, and so we're telling people you can't catch. That's affecting business. So NOAA is one. We run the International Trade Administration. So if you have a business and you would like to export, we have something called the U.S. Export Assistance Center. We will tell you where in the world your products are desirable, and then we have foreign commercial service officers in 75 countries around the world that will help you navigate those countries to sell your goods and services. So that's ITA. We do the census. So most of the surveys that are run by the government, we run those surveys, and of course by the Constitution, we run the decennial census, which we are trying very hard to actually deliver a census, a 21st century census in 2020. And this is a big pivotal year for us in the census. Whether the processes that we use are accepted, we could potentially save you, the taxpayer, $5 or $6 billion in the census if we can automate some of the things that we think we can do.
It used to be a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money. The idea that we spend $18 billion on a census is crazy, right? And we're trying to do it for 12, and obviously, but it requires the use of technology, and we have to make sure it works and it's effective, because a lot rides on the census. So the weather, ITA, census. We run something called the National Telecommunications, NTIA, and Information Agency. So we run the map of spectrum, right? So we control the map, and we decide what parts of the map are for public, let's say for private use.
The airwaves, essentially.
The airwaves. What part of the airwaves is for private use, and what part of the airwaves is for government use. And we're trying to make more and more of it available for private use. When that happens, the FCC auctions it off and sets the regulations for the use of that. We also, through that organization, are working on your internet governance and internet policy. It's a very important issue that affects all of our lives. We also run BIS. We give you, if you create a good or a service that has a dual use, it could be used for both civilian purposes and military purposes, you may need a license in order to sell that good outside the United States. We both give you that license, and we also police that. We run NIST. NIST is really cool. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So it's probably something some of you think about and some of us didn't think about. So it started because there was a fire in Baltimore, and a bunch of fire trucks came from around the region, and they couldn't plug their hoses into the same fire hydrant. Without standards, you can't how do things work with each other? So think about the internet, think about your apps, think about nanotechnology, think about buildings, think about nuclear reactors. We set the standards for all of those things. And so it's a pretty extraordinary organization. We run the Economic Development Administration and the Minority Business Development Administration. So we are the only, EDA is the only part of the government that has a sole grant making for economic development. There's lots of grant making, but ours is solely around economic development. And so we do that. Let's see. You get the idea. Patent and trademarks.
Well, here's actually, as I listen to you, I think of my father-in-law who always used to wear plaid shirts and striped pants. It's like you've got like everything going here, right? From fish to...
Well, let me be a fashion designer and make it all coherent for you. Okay, which is that it really fits into, we have a strategy that has 4 pillars. Our pillars are international trade, right? So there's an enormous amount of what we do, whether it's setting standards or it's helping you sell your goods around the world. That's a very important part of what we do. That all, we have multiple bureaus that work on that. We have innovation, and under that, we have strategies around manufacturing, around skill development, and around the digital economy. Data. Data is a huge asset that we possess at the Department of Commerce. To give you an idea, we produce simply at the Weather Service alone 20 terabytes of data a day. That's 2 Libraries of Congress every day. We only make 10% of that information available at this point. And we have data. We have census data, we have economic data, we have weather data, I mean, on and on. And so we are developing a strategy that will take much longer than just this administration to how to work with the private sector in terms of maximizing the value of the data that we have. Then we're an environmental intelligence agency also. All of these parts of our strategy really engage with commerce. If you think about it, there is actually a logic. There are parts that ought to also be involved, that ought to be at the Commerce Department that are not, that the President would like to see happen, such as the financing agencies, EXIM, OPIC, et cetera. The President's vision is that we're really more of a Department of Business than a department solely, or the Department of Commerce. And I think the President's vision makes a lot of sense. The Congress has not given him the authority to reorganize.
So when I was there, it struck me that there were a lot of functions that should be under one roof, particularly as related to trade and exports. And I actually argued for consolidation. But what you find in Washington is that these are fiefdoms, that there are people in Congress who oversee these agencies. There are the bureaucracies themselves, and the resistance to change is enormous. How do you overcome that to rationalize the government in a way that makes sense in the 21st century? Just using your piece of the world as one example.
So the President has proposed, did propose a reorganization to create the Department of Business. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think there are details of it I would adjust based on what I know today, but let's just say conceptually, the idea that you put more of the financing organizations at SBA, more trade, it's all in one place. It fits under the strategies that I already articulated. It goes back to your very first...
I don't doubt that it's logical. I'm just saying,
okay, so
how do you get it done in a city that doesn't always operate on a logical basis?
Back to your statement about business versus government. In business, if you're a CEO and you look at your organization, first of all, you have to evolve your organization to stay competitive. We need to evolve our government to stay competitive. And we need both policy-wise to stay competitive, but we also need to evolve our government so that we're more nimble to be able to react. So it becomes a question of really trying to work with Congress and see if you can build up a constituency to get that done. that's been a challenge. It hasn't been, during my tenure, we haven't really taken that on at this point. It happened before I came, and the question will be during the last 2 years, do we do it? In a funny way, now may be the right time because it's towards the end of an administration. You're not doing it for your own purposes. You're really trying to set the government up for better purposes going forward. So it may be a good time.
I hope you're right. I think that, again, every one of these agencies has congressional overseers for whom these are fiefdoms, and they don't want to necessarily see consolidation because those fiefdoms shrink, and often that's not just, those are small government or no government conservatives as well as liberals. I mean, it's not the province of one. Members of Congress like turf. And but I don't want to, this, so I'm not going to.
Yes.
But it is interesting because you said something really, I think, important, that business, you have a different orientation when you come from business as to how you set up organizations. People often say we should run government like a business. How do you, having come from business, how do you respond to that? It seems to me they're slightly different organisms. In this sense, having a rational operation is important, but there are functions of government that are not, government's not a profit-making venture. So tell me how you react when people, as a business person, that we ought to run government like a business.
I think my reaction to that is yes and no. Yes, we should be.
So you have learned the Washington thing.
No. On the yes side, we should be more efficient, and we should be more accountable, and we're trying to raise the idea of accountability. And we've tried to make the Department of Commerce a service organization where people come to work thinking, I have a customer and I have a client and I have work to do for those people. Not I'm exist in some vacuum, because we don't exist in a vacuum. We are, our salaries, et cetera, are paid by the taxpayer, and they deserve service. No, in the sense that you have a far larger group of stakeholders than in the private sector. And the implications of what you do are much, even if you move the needle a little bit, the amplification is huge of what you do. So there is value to making sure that you're bringing along more constituents. But at the end of the day, we have to have action. We can't have inaction. Inaction is hurting us from a global competitiveness standpoint. And the world is not standing still. While we're busy, having our whatever it is, where we're not addressing certain issues, the world is not standing still. And stagnation has a price. And we see it. I see it in the trade arena, very, very vividly. And we need to stay, ahead of the curve. The United States of America has a very, very important role to play in the world. But we cannot take our position for granted. Our position is sustained by making good decisions, more good decisions than bad decisions, and doing them in as timely a fashion as we can. And so it's important that we
So why don't you run down as you look at the global competition, run down the areas where you think that we need to pick up our game. Where is it that this stagnation, as you describe it, is hurting us the most?
Well, let's take trade. I'm not going to say most, but let's take trade, for example. The president has been pushing for 2 new significant trade agreements, and in order to get those passed, he needs something called Trade Promotion Authority. So Congress gives an authority to a president that says, if you negotiate a trade agreement and it has certain criteria, we will then, when you give us that agreement, we won't vote on amendment. We won't vote on Article 1, Article 6, and Article 7. We're going to vote on it either up or down on that agreement. We need to get Trade Promotion Authority, and our U.S. trade rep in the White House and us, the Department of Commerce, plays a big role in this. We need these trade agreements, Trans-Pacific Partnership called TPP, and the trade agreement with Europe called TTIP.
So Asia and Europe.
Asia and Europe. Why is it so important? because the standards of the agreements that we are negotiating today are totally different than the standards of agreements that have been done before. We're addressing labor issues, we're addressing environmental standards, we're addressing intellectual property protection, we're addressing things like state-owned enterprises. We're trying to create a level playing field for American businesses around the world, and particularly in Asia and with Europe right now. And the TPP would be a trade agreement with 40% of the world's GDP. And so think about the standards that we have. We are pretty much an open, it's pretty easy to sell your goods and services from a foreign country here. So really what we're trying to do is get a better deal for ourselves around the world, as well as set the standards for global trade, so that it doesn't hurt our labor force, so it doesn't hurt the global environment, so that it's a win for the global economy.
Well, that's a big, but you know, because you hear it from Democrats on the left as well as Republicans on the right, a fear that these agreements ultimately are not winners for American workers. Concern, for example, about the auto industry and cars coming in from Korea. I assumed you would, but I want to hear why.
Well, take the auto industry. There is more for the first time in decades, we have manufacturing growing in the United States. 700,000 jobs created since 2009 in manufacturing. Auto industry. The auto industry is growing in the United States. Foreign companies want their plants here, and then they want to make things here and use this as sometimes a global hub and sometimes a regional hub for manufacturing. Here's the way to think about trade agreements is as follows. First of all, 11.3 million Americans have jobs in this country solely because of American exports. So it is very important in terms of a job creation, exporting is. We have record exports again. I think in 2014 we're going to on our way to record exports. Very, very important. But our ability to export means we have to have market access. To have market access and be on a level playing field once you get into that country requires these kinds of trade agreements. And if we don't set the standards, I'm telling you, our competitors are setting the standards. China, for example, in the last couple of weeks, signed trade agreements with Australia and with South Korea, two very big trading partners for the United States. And that can be the standard, or we can set the standard. And so I think the idea that this is bad for the American worker is something of a couple decades ago. And that's why it's so important, the labor standards that we have in our agreements. So imagine negotiating with Vietnam, a communist country. They want to be part of TPP. They have to bring their country's labor standards up in order to be part of TPP. That's good for the American worker.
A lot of what animates some of the resistance to these treaties is changes in our economy. We've seen a lot of globalization, you talked about manufacturing. Manufacturing took a huge hit, 80s and 90s, and over the out-migration of jobs. So speak to me a little about sort of how we create an economy in which there is a flourishing middle class and in which there's more mobility. The American dream was what we were about. You work hard, you can get ahead. Now we're about last and economic mobility. Statistic the other day says if you start in the 5th quintile of our economy, you get a 7% chance of ever getting out of it. What do we do about that? And because there's this concern that businesses will thrive, but underneath you're going to have this terrible inequality that's growing.
So I think that there's multiple strategy that actually the president has been pursuing, which is, first of all, we have to make sure we have a skilled workforce that can.
You've done a lot of work.
This is a very personal issue to me, which is for the United States to remain global leader economically, we have to be striving for the most innovative jobs. We have to do what we can do to support innovation. And if you actually look at the statistics, 12.7% of American adults are employed in the innovation economy here in the United States. It's about a third of that in Europe. So if we can stay on the cutting edge of innovation, which goes to like the manufacturing hubs that, and Chicago won the one for digital manufacturing. So one is we have to stay innovative. Two is we have to train our people so that they are capable of doing the jobs of an innovation economy. Because what we don't want is to say, okay, we have more jobs, but they don't pay well enough. The third thing is, let's not, I know there's so much controversy about healthcare, but for the first time you're seeing the growth in healthcare costs, that is slowed dramatically. Slowed dramatically. You know, having run a business, one of the biggest growth and cost centers used to be the healthcare costs for our employees. So what did you do? Every year you'd put a little bit more where the employee paid a little bit more of that. That's biting it. That bit into very significantly people's incomes. So by bending the cost curve in terms of healthcare, that's also going to help incomes rise. So training, innovation, healthcare. And we have to keep growing. At the end of the day, we have to keep our economy growing. And to do that, we have to be flexible, but we also have to have standards for our employees. And when you look at our companies, so many
Standards to protect employees.
yeah, so that they're, you know, and for the most part, our businesses treat our employees, you know, for the most part, there's always an exception, you know, pretty well. And so now the question is, we've got to see everybody start to thrive. The first thing you have to do is bring down unemployment, right? And so to me, that's happening. I mean, we're on the Federal Reserve, I think, says we're on a track to be at the end of the Obama administration at 5% unemployment. Think about that. Think about when you were in your job, what were you dealing with? North of 10% unemployment.
Yes, we would have taken 5.
5, you would have taken 7 at that moment. I mean, it was horrible.
We would have.
I mean, it was a disaster.
We couldn't even see that from the distance.
And the idea that the United States of America has created over 10 million jobs, the private sector has created over 10 million jobs since that time.
But the point is the one you raised, which is the quality of jobs is important.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think what's happening is you're seeing better and better quality jobs being created. Why did we do the visa policy with China? I mean, you read or heard the president and the Chinese president agreed we're going to extend our visas, visitor and business visas, 10 years with the Chinese. So you get a visa, instead of having to renew it every year, it's for 10 years. Student visa, 5 years. This is a very big deal. That is worth to our economy over 100,000 jobs and over tens of billions of dollars. I mean, we're building, what the Obama administration has been doing is trying to build up, you know, real growth, not bubbles, right? Not fake growth. This is real growth and solid and sustainable growth. And that's what you're starting to see. You've got housing growing, you've got construction growing. It's not where it was, but it's growing.
Well, on that point, the one thing you didn't mention was infrastructure. Mm-hmm. How significant is that as an ingredient of
it's essential.
Job creation and lifting wages?
It's absolutely essential, and you're exactly right. We need an infrastructure. We need sustainable investment in infrastructure.
This is one area where people say we ought to run the government like a business, but businesses, as you know, make investments to grow. Sometimes borrow money to make investments to grow.
So what we're trying to do, given this current circumstance, which has been you were there since the beginning, trying to get a sustainable infrastructure investment bill past the stimulus bill, has been a real problem. Of course we need it. We need roads, bridges, but we also need broadband. I mean, we need access to, you know, the internet is as important as the roads are, rail, etc. All of this is
21st century airports would be good.
21st century airports.
For those of you who fly into LaGuardia.
Yeah, travel around the world and see what they're doing. I mean, you know, we have today, to give you an idea, I think we have 72 million visitors to the United States. We're on a trajectory. We have a strategy to take that to 100 million visitors, but we don't have the infrastructure to do that. But we're putting in place the policy to bring the people here because it will create good jobs.
Last question, and then you guys, I want to hear your questions. As you travel around, I know, as I mentioned, you headed this Skills USA, is that what it was called?
Skills for America's
Skills
Future.
for America's Future, and you've also served on the Board of Education here. You've been deeply involved in this issue. As you travel around the world, what do you observe about the education systems of our competitors, and where does that lead you in terms of where we are as we approach education today?
Well, I think, you know, we're underinvesting in education in our country, and it's not uniform, but I mean, certainly I saw that in Chicago. And it has a lasting effect. We have the greatest, university system in the world, and we have enormous opportunity at that level. But we need to be investing in early childhood. We need to be investing in, making sure that if you graduate from high school, the degree you've got is worth the paper it's printed on. And we need to offer.
And that you can read it.
And that you can read it. But to the credit of, mayors, governors, and the president and his education secretary, high school graduation rates are going to be at the highest level at this country is seen.
How do you read this debate over the Common Core?
I think that you have to have some sort of standards, and what it's doing is it's forcing. Here's the problem: if you have no standard. Every school in Chicago used to be able to pick its own curriculum. Here's the problem with that. The problem is, if you're a child, I think they called it the mobility rate, which is, we have a significant number of children in the Chicago public school system who move. They move every 6 or 8 weeks because of their, remember, we have a huge percentage of kids living below the poverty line, and their families are moving. So you move from school to school, you're lost. What's being taught in the schools is totally different. So we need more uniformity. It doesn't have to be precise. No one is saying it's precisely the same, but you need enough so that kids know and parents know at the end of 2nd grade, my child has learned a certain number of things, and that they can read, and they're doing basic math and things like that. So I think I applaud creating standards. Is it too much structure or not enough structure? I'm not an expert in education. I just know. And the other thing is, if you don't have enough money, you also need to spend your money as wisely as possible. It means you get greater efficiency if you can, buy more, let's say, books or course materials that are similar. So I don't think we're drumming creativity out of kids in America. I mean, we have the most creative society in the world. And I think that is sustained, and I don't think the Common Core is the problem.
The last question, and then we'll go to questions. Sitting where you sit and with the responsibilities you have, what are the implications of not reforming our education system, not investing more in it? What do you...
The implication is our global competitiveness, and we cannot take it for granted. The rest of the world sees what the United States has and is doing, and they want to beat us. We are in a race for talent. We are in a race for staying on the cutting edge of innovation, and we have got to invest in our society to do that. It means we have to invest in infrastructure. It means we have to invest in immigration reform. It means that we have to invest in R&D, and we have to do things like the manufacturing hubs. The idea that the United States of America has 4 or 5 innovative manufacturing hubs, and Germany, which is, a quarter of our size, has 60, that's not smart. We need to stay on, to create good jobs, create the kind of mobility, to create the kind of incomes that we want for the middle class. We've got to invest in skills. We've got to invest in our people.
Questions? Oh, great. Sorry, I talked way too long, as usual.
So you talk about economics as if it's like this competition, but to what extent is it a cooperation as much as it is a competition, because we also talk about these trade deals, and it's almost as if on one hand we're trying to work together with other countries, but on the other hand we're trying to outbeat them. So is it more important to focus on just doing well, or is it more important to focus on just being the best?
We have to do both. And I'm not suggesting that, competition over cooperation. As you said, trade agreements are ultimately extremely cooperative agreements, and it's very important. What I see around the world, and I've met, I've probably been to 26 or 7 countries and met with leaders of most of those countries, both the heads of state and their economic leadership teams. And, countries want American business around the world, and they want to see us there. They feel that we set a good example. We're so critical of our own, but the rest of the world looks and says, boy, the way your businesses treat their people, their respect for rule of law, the fact that they respect intellectual property protection, the fact they invest in the communities where they're selling their goods and services. We want more of that, and we want your businesses here to also set the example for our own businesses. So it's absolutely cooperation, but it's also competition. We can't become complacent. We have to stay, if we want the kind of income levels and growing middle class, which we all do, we have to stay innovative. It's all interrelated with one another, and we have to be able to export. We have to sort of do all of this stuff. You can't do one to the exclusion of others.
Hi, I'm Nadia Quarles. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Business Diversity here at the University of Chicago. And I hold a professional services symposium every year at the university, which has generated 48 contracts with minority and women-owned professional service firms here at the university. And Alejandra Castillo is a great friend of mine and great support, and Rosie Rios as well. Can you speak a little to what the Chamber is doing with minority and women-owned businesses?
Well, what we're trying to do at the Department of Commerce with minority and women-owned businesses is to work with folks like yourself who are in the business of procuring things, and get more and more minority and women-owned businesses to the table so that they can sell themselves. Then we're also working with the businesses to help them up their game so that they're more capable to sell to larger institutions such as the University of Chicago or others, or to large corporations. And it's a virtuous cycle, right? Because often those are smaller or medium-sized businesses. Those are businesses that if they got another contract, they were going to hire a few more people. And that's exactly what we want to see. And it's a very grassroots effort. We'd love to figure out a way to make it online and go from this big to that big, and we're open to all suggestions. And we're obviously using the internet, but it's also working with businesses is often a one by each encounter.
Well, we're going to be doing some collaborations with MBDA on creating opportunities for minority businesses.
Excellent.
So
Thank you.
To know that.
Thanks for setting the example.
Hi, my name is Donna Hampton Smith, and I'm the President and CEO of the Washington Park Chamber of Commerce. And we're excited about the possibility of having the Obama Presidential Library come here. Roo-roo.
I actually was going to make that decision.
I live in an area that's a blighted community, and there are incentives such as the TIF, tax increment financing. What is being done, and what type of investment are being considered to help develop blighted communities on the south and west side?
So at the Department of Commerce, what we have is the Economic Development Agency, and so that would be places where we would invest. I don't know what we're doing on the south and west side at the Department of Commerce, and I can't speak for the city of Chicago in terms of TIF, so I'm probably not the right person to be able to give you a detail about that.
Hi, my name is Tracy. I'm a fourth year in the college, and I've spent some time. I spent one of my summers in Select USA, actually, at the Department of Commerce.
Excellent.
And while I was there, I noticed that not only yourself, but a lot of people there have experience in both the private and the public sectors. So for students right now considering our future career paths with interests in the intersection of economics and politics, I was wondering if you had any suggestions of what how we should view our experiences or potential experiences in both sectors.
Well, first of all, I would encourage anyone who has an interest in working in the public sector, and certainly we can use all the talent we can get at the Department of Commerce, to do it. I mean, I think as a young person to have exposure in an administration is an extraordinary opportunity. And, there's a lot of myths about working in the government, but I will tell you my experience is young people get a lot of responsibility very early, and there seems to be a lot of mobility. In other words, people move around and get a variety of experiences. But I also think, I mean, frankly, I would encourage you to also, if you're thinking about your career, not just have a public sector career, but also have some private sector experience. I think it really helps. And by that, I mean, even if you're a national security expert, being in academia or being in a think tank or being in a place where you're not just under the gun of the day-to-day pressure of governing, but also having an opportunity to develop your thoughts and ideas is important. So whether you're in a national security type of effort or you're in the commerce, I would say it's useful to have both public and private sector experience. But I would encourage all of you, particularly at a young age, to try the public sector, even if you do it just for a couple of years. First of all, you'll develop a network that's unbelievable. It's something that you will draw upon the rest of your life. I didn't do this. I wish I had. And I see the benefits that the young people working for us have had, and then they come in and out of government. That's a wonderful way to have a pretty exciting career.
Hi, good morning. My name is Edward Wang, I'm a finance PhD at Booth School of Business here. We talked a lot about what the Commerce Department does, and I was wondering if we can talk a little bit more about your personal experience, because I was watching the new show, Madam Secretary, a few days ago, and with my wife to get her exposed to some American culture. And I think it was a
Can we chat after this?
Sure. And I was wondering if you can share with us some major moments of happiness that you experienced at the Commerce Department. Also, some moments of perhaps frustration. I know from watching the first episode of that show, I know that lady was experiencing some problems both internally and externally. So some personal anecdotes would be, I think, very interesting for the audience.
Well, I'm not suggesting I can compete with a television show, but and my observation of both the books and the television shows is they're way, what do they say? They jump the shark a little bit. They're just a little over the top about what goes on. The reality is that moments of excitement for me are moments when you're in a conversation trying to figure out policy. Are we going to extend visas, from 1 year to 10 years? How are we going to respond to the challenges created by Edward Snowden? How are we going to, immigration reform? What are we going to do to continue to push immigration reform? How are we going to get the trade? First of all, specific terms of the trade deal, but how are we going to get these trade deals actually passed, completed, negotiated, finished, passed through Congress? I mean, those are exciting moments and humbling because they have enormous impact. And those are just a few of the little issues that sit on the president's desk, right? I mean, those are the ones we, get up and live or die over, or some of them. There are more. But if you aren't pretty, I get up every morning and it's like, I feel like I have to bring it because this matters. It matters a lot. And so that to me is exciting. Frustrating is, did I make a good enough argument to actually persuade others? Or frustrating is when there's no action on something that has bipartisan, bicameral support, like the manufacturing hubs. It's supported by both parties in both houses. Why aren't we doing this? It's $1 billion. This is not hugely expensive, and it's necessary for innovation. That's frustrating. Now, we'll keep working on it. Frustrating is getting your people through the process, right? It's a, Senate approval is really an important concept, but when you have an assistant secretary that's doing a very important job for, let's say, industry and analysis. I've been without an assistant secretary of industry and analysis for over a year. That doesn't help anyone running a business because we need to do that work. Now, and the work's happening, but I don't have a leader there. And that, who's being hurt? The American businesses are, and the economy's being hurt. It doesn't make any sense. So, but every day you get up and you have to be an optimist. You have to believe that you can actually try and get some of this stuff done. And I don't. I find those television shows. I'm not sure. I think they make it worse because they make it crazy as if people are nuts. I mean, people are maybe crazy, but that's not the problem. The way they portray it isn't the problem.
This gentleman's from Booth. I'm sure there are aspiring capitalists here who, you talk about serving, and you sort of answered this before, but there is the lure of money and making money, and that's become sort of a gauge of success. And that's part of what we compete with when the public sector is competing. You yourself said it's hard to attract people from business. What's your message to people about public service and the importance of it? And how do you value that next to making a great living? And because government is not a government, you don't get unless certain Chicago politicians have figured out a way to serve themselves, but not everybody can do that. How would you?
What I've seen, David, and just being very real about it, is young people before they have children who are interested in public service they are having extraordinary experiences, and they are actually having more impact than maybe you might in the private sector at the same age. When you get to the point where someone has a family, that's when I'm getting these conversations where folks come in and say, I love my work, I love what I'm doing, it's unbelievable, we get to do this, we get to do that, we're traveling all over. But, either my wife needs a better job or my husband needs this for me to stay and to be able to afford to do this. And that is a tragedy. That's a problem. And so then there's trying to get the people like me who have had a certain amount of success in their life to say, okay, you've done that, now come in and serve your country. And
Sort of in that middle strata, isn't it?
the middle strata is the hardest part to keep, and some can for various reasons, but when you really peel the onion, you find somebody's got, because you've got kids and you have to figure out how to make it work financially, right? But I find that there are people who want to make the move, but remember, it's also families. You're moving, if you're trying to attract families, it's not just the individual anymore. And that's no different than the private sector, only we have fewer tools. We don't have more money to offer, and we don't have more flexibility to offer. We do have maybe a more normalized hours sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
No. For some, that's true.
Final word, and I should have gotten into more of this before, but just give us your take on where the American economy is going in the next year or two. There's a lot of concern about what's happening in Europe and whether the slowdown there will drag our economy back.
Well, let's take stock of where we're at, because everybody is gloom and doom. I mean, you have the last quarter 3.9% GDP growth. As I said, the deficit's been cut in half. over 10 million jobs created. And our sectors are, you don't have an economy built on bubbles. You have an economy built on real growth right now. We have an economy that we're trying to grow more export opportunities, so there's continuing opportunity to sell our goods and services around the world. Where do I think we're going? You know, you do worry. You hear a lot of concern about China and about Europe. You know, they, coming out of the G20, the fact that the finance ministers basically said we have to do more stimulus in order to keep the world economy growing is important. Kind of coordination and cooperation, which is very important, to recognizing that, you know, at the end of the day, that matters. Global GDP growth matters. It may not matter to your particular business, but it does matter in general. The United States sits in a very good position. We are producing more energy than we have ever produced. We are the #1 place in the world that people want to invest, 2 years running by A.T. Kearney. Select USA is our effort to attract foreign direct investment. Every business leader I meet from outside the United States wants to have a presence here. You know, we've got an incredible workforce, and we have lots of things that we have to work on, but we should not be so negative and down on ourselves. We have 3.9% GDP growth in the last quarter. Manufacturing jobs are growing, and for the first time in decades, and manufacturing output is growing. It's, you know, I feel good about where the U.S. economy is, but we can't take it for granted. That's my point. That's why we have to work. That's why what you need to ask of your government, guys, you can't sit on your hands. You got to keep at it, because it takes constant adapting in order to stay in a good position.
Well, we're grateful for you to be here today, but we're also grateful for your willingness to serve, and wish you the best of luck.